Welcome to the show. We have a very special guest with us today. David Dodd is a very good friend of mine. I've known him for many years, and I actually work with him. He's the president of the International Sustainable Resilience Center, which he's going to explain what that's all about. And without any further ado, I just want to welcome you to the show.
Great to be here, Bruce.
Thanks for being here.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Yeah. So let's just start there. So the International Sustainable Resilience Center is, how old is this now?
It started 7 years ago.
7 years ago. Yeah.
And it took a while for it to mature and become actually a true organization.
Right.
We had to go through a fairly arduous process. We're affiliated with the United Nations Economic Commission for Europe, who has a International Center of Excellence in public-private partnerships. And our center is a specialist center, one of 7 that operate under agreement with the International Center of Excellence. It's sector-based. Some are dealing with roads, some are dealing with local governance, some are a wide variety of things. And after meeting the director of that center in Japan, after the 2011 tsunami and earthquake there, we talked about the possibility of forming one specialist center in resilience, public-private partnerships, to increase resilience. And in further discussion, we added sustainability. So we had to go through a process of filing certain documents and getting those approved. And as of last October of 2017, so a little more than a year ago, we were granted approval and authority, and we were granted 501c3 nonprofit status. We had to have an endorsement from the State Department, and we received that. So as of a year ago, October, we were officially up and operating. But even after that, it took a while. So right. to get things going and get things really in place and actually begin operations, which we did the first part of this year.
So you're actually partnering with the United Nations?
We have a memorandum of understanding with the United Nations Economic Commission for Europe. Mm-hmm. And our goal, all of the specialist centers, and we were the 7th, and there's one additional now in health. Mm-hmm. So there are 8 of those, and we are all dedicated to furthering the implementation of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, which are 17 goals designed to further carry the United Nations mission in alleviating poverty and basically making life better for people around the world.
Yeah. So let's drill into the sustainable resilience, because that's specifically what your organization is focused on.
Yes.
Can you tell us briefly what is the concept behind that? What is sustainable resilience?
Well, and that's a very good question. I tell people that I have the distinct honor of having an organization that has 3 buzzwords, not 1, not 2, but 3 buzzwords. Yeah. So sustainability is the ability to guard resources and in the process of that, continuing operation of whatever that system is.
Through any kind of a disaster.
In general, sustainability is through any type of occurrence,
okay. Anything.
And a lot of people tie sustainability with environmentalism. That's a part of it, but it also means sustainable systems, sustainable ingredients into systems. And for infrastructure, sustainable infrastructure that can continue to operate in any type of circumstance. Mm-hmm. That's where resilience comes in, mm-hmm. because that deals specifically with adverse events. Mm-hmm. We think mostly about natural disasters, mm-hmm. but an adverse event could be an economic upheaval, a political upheaval. And as you know, we're dealing now around the world with a lot of displacement of people, because not only of disaster, but also war and other adverse events. So you put those 2 together because they are inherently dependent upon each other. You can't have sustainability if something can't continue to operate in the face of adversity. Mm-hmm. And you can't have something that's resilient if it's not able to continue operating in any circumstance. Mm-hmm. So that's where we came together. We were originally, and you know this, Bruce, we originally were the International Resilience Center. Mm-hmm. And we were led to realize that without sustainability, you can't have resilience. So
Right.
that's why, and we term it sustainable resilience because, again, we want to show the interconnection between those two things.
Right. So this is a special area of expertise, and I want to back up and with your story particularly, and let you explain how you got here, because it's a fascinating story. You started out as an expert in the world of economic development, and that goes back a long time.
Don't say how many years.
I won't say how many years,
Yeah,
but
thank you.
where did that begin?
I began my professional career as a banker, and as a banker in a small community, the community I grew up in, I became involved in economic development, and I fell completely in love with economic development. The idea of helping create opportunity for people, whether it be jobs or entrepreneurship, starting their own business or going to work in a better job, that's just appealed to me completely. I was asked to teach, and then eventually became the assistant dean. It's not a traditional academic title, but it's what they call the director.
Right.
And I then became the director. And then I became the director of international development and took it out of the country for the first time to another country. And continued to teach until 3 years ago. But
It's over 20 years of teaching other economic development professionals.
right, I began as a very young child teaching.
Yeah.
So,
and I know you actually, you have a colleague in Mexico. You actually helped them establish the equivalent of EDI in Mexico, right?
I had three wonderful people, one of whom I had taught, who went to the Economic Development Institute in the United States, and ran into him just by accident. I was working in Southern California, and I crossed into Mexico with my clients, and he was sitting in a lobby of a hotel, and it was so amazing because he said, "What are you doing here?" And I said, "Well, I have a client right across the border." And he said, "I've been trying to get in touch with you." He said, we're trying to launch a version of Economic Development Institute, but we needed to find you." And I said, "Well, I'm right here." And I said, "When is this? When are you going to kick this off?" He said, "In an hour." Literally, that's what happened. So that started a wonderful journey throughout Mexico with these wonderful people, a small university, but a very, very highly regarded university in Baja California called SETI's University. And we established the version specifically toward the Mexican economy of the Economic Development Institute. Brought instructors down from the U.S. and then eventually gave them the capacity for their own instructors. And versions of that are still successfully being taught. Yeah.
So throughout this time, you're also working internationally, all over the world, right?
Yes, I developed an international practice through my friend in Mexico, but specifically overseas. I taught, again, at the Economic Development Institute, a gentleman from Australia who invited me to come over, and before I knew it, I was working in Australia and Japan and Europe, and that led me toward understanding the value of the international community, and not only the economic, but the social and cultural value of traveling and seeing other parts of the world.
So you've actually established over this years of work a network of other professionals all over the world.
All over the world. Wonderful, wonderful people. And after in fact, I was in Mexico wrapping up one of the sessions of the Economic Development Institute when I saw this huge storm taking up the entire Gulf of Mexico, and that was Katrina.
Yeah. Man-made and natural disasters are taking an increasing toll on the world's population, affecting virtually everyone in every country around the world. Floods, hurricanes, wildfires, earthquakes, plagues, famine, population displacement, and added to that list, the latest man-made form of disaster, cyber attacks. Disaster recovery includes economic recovery, rebuilding clean water and sanitation systems, along with commercial and residential buildings and homes, transportation systems, also restoring education, health, and social services. But much more is required. We have learned that disaster preparedness is not enough. We have to go further, creating sustainable infrastructure, communities, and economies so that affected regions can bounce back more quickly, providing relief services in a timely manner, restoring infrastructure and jobs, and minimizing the impact of all forms of disasters on people's lives. For decades, we have depended on the public sector to come to our rescue. But in the face of record-breaking damage, that path is no longer sustainable. A new method of making places more sustainable is required. A new path must be created. The International Sustainable Resilience Center is creating that new path. The ISRC helps nations achieve this goal by developing private-public partnerships that help reduce the negative impacts of disasters. The center provides the framework to build sustainable economies and offers expertise in best practices and innovative approaches to help structure resilience-based public-private partnerships. The IRSC also helps integrate resilience and sustainability into all public-private partnerships through globally recognized expertise and experience. The ISRC has the potential to be a catalyst for realization of most, if not all, of the United Nations' 17 Sustainable Development Goals. The International Sustainable Resilience Center has the knowledge and resources to tailor virtually any project to become more resilient and sustainable, with reduced risk and cost for partners while increasing benefits to communities worldwide. Please donate to ISRC's Resilient 2019 campaign today and help make the world a more resilient and safer place to live. So David, we're talking about your experience globally, working internationally as a consultant in economic development, and then something happened in the town you now live in. It was a little hurricane called Katrina, and I think we all are familiar with that, and the level of devastating was horrible. So tell me a little bit about that and how that led to transition in your life with what you're doing.
I was, as I said earlier, I was in Mexico and looked at this storm that was taking up the entire Gulf of Mexico. I'd never seen anything like it. And I knew that something bad was going to happen. And I was not living in New Orleans at the time. I was living in North Louisiana, where I'm originally from. But I knew the Secretary of Economic Development for the state of Louisiana, wonderful friend called named Mike Olivier. And I sent him an email, and I said, I see this thing coming, and it doesn't look good. And I said, what can I do to help? And he sent me back a 5-word response: get your bleep to Baton Rouge, the state capital. So I left the next day, stopped in Shreveport, and then went back down to Baton Rouge. And Katrina had hit, and the city had flooded. It was a terrible, terrible, terrible thing. And most people, even today, I think some people aren't aware that the hurricane itself did some damage in New Orleans. But the real catastrophe was not the hurricane, it was the aftermath. The storm surge from that hurricane weakened the walls of one of the primary levees that protects the city. New Orleans is like a fishbowl. Mm-hmm. It's below sea level. And these levees are built around it to protect it. But the problem with a fishbowl is what? Once you pour the water in, where does it go? Yeah. You can't, and they have a pump system, but it was not.
I remember even at the time in the news stories, they said it's gone. It passed the city. We're safe. Yeah. And everybody went to bed that night thinking, oh, they dodged the bullet. And the next morning they woke up and the city was flooded.
And many of them were on their roofs the next morning.
Right.
Because that storm surge and the way it happened, it went up Lake Pontchartrain, then it came back down. When it came back down, it was very powerful, broke the walls of one of the key levees, and the entire city flooded, and there was no way to get the water out.
Right.
And so it was a textbook case of lack of resilience that caused that catastrophe. And that had a real impact on me. But I was called in as an economic development professional to help help them in putting together a substantial summit in Washington to help put into place the framework for the recovery. And that's what we did. And then periodically I would help the Department of Economic Development, go to meetings, things like that. And I learned a lot. And then from there, because I had this overseas practice, and that was a fairly high-profile event, I started getting calls from overseas. And so I, again, had been to Australia many times, and they had flooding in Australia, and they asked me to consult with them on that. Then the earthquake and tsunami in Japan, an earthquake that caused real devastation in the Colorado River basin in Baja California. And then the Gulf oil spill,
Mm-hmm.
which was, a real devastating event that was a man-made disaster, a man-caused disaster. And that opened up a new understanding of me that not all disasters are caused by Mother Nature, unfortunately.
Yeah.
But that gave me a fairly broad background of experience. And as I said, when I was in Japan, I met the gentleman that had founded this international center in public-private partnerships. And what most people don't understand is that economic development really is the development of public-private partnerships that create widespread, sustained private investment. My former partner, Ed Morrison, and I had come up with that definition for the International Economic Development Council, which is the American Medical Association of the economic development profession.
Mm-hmm.
And that realization came to me years before I had this encounter with this gentleman. And so I told him that. And he said, "Oh, you're exactly right." He said, "We need your expertise. We want you to serve on our team of specialists for public-private partnerships that provides basically an advisory group that provides input into the activities of the center." So I did that. And that's how the International Sustainable Resilience Center came about. But that journey through all of these different types of disasters, different types, different places, helped me to understand that every place is different, but there are certain commonalities.
Mm-hmm.
Every disaster is different, but there are certain commonalities.
Mm-hmm.
And the mixture of that, the mixture of understanding there are certain things that every disaster touches.
Mm-hmm.
The economy, of course, human life, what's no price on that.
Right.
Right? But also infrastructure.
Mm-hmm.
And many times people don't understand that disasters themselves, because you think about a bridge or a subway system or being something that's oh my gosh, that's a huge piece of real estate and a huge apparatus that's been constructed there. They can be damaged
Mm-hmm.
severely.
Mm-hmm.
And right now there's fear in New York that the tunnels under Penn Station, which were damaged during Hurricane Sandy, if a similar storm comes, the damage could be catastrophic.
Mm-hmm.
So these systems can be weakened and they need to be strengthened,
Mm-hmm.
but more importantly, they should be designed from the ground up to be resilient.
Mm-hmm.
And they call that hardening of assets.
Right. So my knowledge about this area of expertise is somewhat limited. So if you forgive my ignorance here, but I'm curious in understanding more broadly what are the things you're focusing on. So infrastructure is an obvious thing, but that's a big ticket item. That's something governments have to invest in, and public-private partnerships clearly have a key role in that. What other things do you focus on? Are there processes that are important, or because let me set this up for you.
Sure.
What my experience, Katrina, here in Houston was from sitting on what I thought was the outside. The next day, I'm in a restaurant down in the Woodlands watching, and the whole restaurant's full of people, and they're glued to the TV. And it was kind of a strange situation. And I started talking to some people, and it turned out almost everybody in the restaurant, over half, was from Louisiana. And they're still watching the disaster unfold. And I was asking them questions about how they're going to deal with this. And I asked somebody, "When are you going back?" And they looked at me like I was an idiot, and they said, "Well, we're never going back." And I said, "Why not?" "We don't have any jobs. Their jobs are gone." Right. So the long-term impact of what a disaster could do came home to me. There was 250,000 people in Louisiana that became Texans overnight. And so there's a lot of issues here, and I'm curious about the best practices. And can you sketch out a little bit more broadly for what are the things you like to focus on here?
That's a very good question. The majority of our focus is on infrastructure and systems. Mm-hmm. And I always say both of those things, because infrastructure, again, is necessary that's the foundation of an economy, of a community. So we have to have stronger infrastructure. And the beauty of public-private partnerships are they bring the efficiency and innovation of the private sector and the cause for the common good, for doing well for everyone, mm-hmm. of the public sector together. Mm-hmm. So that, bringing those two together and looking at what not only hard assets, as we call them, but what systems, where did the system fail?
Mm-hmm.
Where did the emergency response, or more importantly, within neighborhoods and individuals, and did people try to help each other? And one of the things that I'm very, very proud of that we did in Oklahoma after a series of tornadoes and storms in Oklahoma in 2015 is we tapped into an organization based in Louisiana, just by pure coincidence. But the organization builds neighborhoods by building relationships between people. So we were able to tap into a foundation based in this community of Shawnee, just outside of Brad Pitt's from Shawnee, so that's a claim to fame.
Yeah.
But it's a great community. It's a community of about 30,000 people, and they have a foundation that was created by the sale of their hospital, and they funded, and they're still funding, an effort to show how building these relationships, and the name of the organization's a nonprofit's Community Renewal, and they've been cited by the United Nations as a best practice in social technology, been very successful in communities all over the world, brought them to Shawnee and did a survey of the community. We got about 2,500 responses, which is 10% of the community responded, and asked them a series of questions, and then implemented this technology that basically is very simple. Go out into the neighborhoods, get people to come out of their homes and meet each other and get to know each other and care about each other. But it's a very profound technology too, and through that, come back and then do a second round of surveys and ask them those same questions and see where the differences are. Do they feel like they're more able to help and be helped by their neighbors? Do they having a safe place to go? One of the components of this is having a place where everyone can go. They call it a friendship house. And does that make them feel more resilient? Has it helped them if there's been an incident? Will that help them? This has the potential, and it's a public-private partnership, because the idea was hatched through the work of FEMA and the recovery operation of the federal government, and it was the community itself, the city itself became involved, and then this private foundation came. And we're very hopeful that this is, and that's a public-private partnership just as much as a public-private partnership for the flood protection system around New Orleans would be.
Right. So there's a lot of different flavors to these variations and what public-private partnership looks like.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's a fascinating example because for centuries we lived in small villages and where the sense community was there. And now in these large urban areas, we live next door to each other and we don't know each other.
Well, we're both in the South. Air conditioning was the greatest thing that happened to the economy of the South. It was the worst thing that happened to the social fabric of the South.
Right.
Because everyone stays inside.
And we used to all sit on the front porch.
Right. And we got to know each other.
Or our grandparents did. Yeah.
I mean, how many people can you ask, hey, how many people, if you're watching now, how many people in your neighborhood do you consider a friend? Now, you may have friends all over the community, but how many of your neighbors do you consider a friend? Now, people in smaller communities are going to have a different answer than people in Houston or New Orleans. But that fabric, that is resilience.
That is resilience. That's fascinating stuff. I got one other question I want to ask you about. Because you told me a little bit about some of the things you're involved in. And there's one project that fascinates me, but just because of the scope and size of this, and most people aren't even aware of it. It's generally referred to as the China Belt Road project, but it goes beyond China. It covers almost every continent except ours because we've already done it. But there's this grand plan over this century, beginning immediately, to build an interstate highway system to connect all the cities in Asia and Europe and Africa. In South America, I know is participating too. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, and it's even bigger than that, Bruce. It's a monumental initiative, and it started with the vision of recreating the ancient Silk Route, which linked Europe, Eurasia, the Middle East, and the East. And the idea was to link Asia, Southeast Asia, the Middle East, Eurasia, and Europe. And then by land. Then they came up with the understanding that the ancient Silk Route was not just a road, it was also a sea route. So they set about to recreate that and to link Africa to Europe, to Eurasia, to Asia. Then they decided that there should be, now that which again has something to do with our climate, the fact that the Northwest Passage that Captain Cook looked for is now there.
It's there.
Because of the polar ice cap melting. And so then they decided to try to link these continents more effectively through that route, and they call that the polar belt. And the belt is actually the idea of not just a road, and that's why, but roads, telecommunication systems, social services, all of those things. And then South America, because again, a place that needed infrastructure to really achieve its potential. And for everyone's knowledge, the United States has signed on to this. The United States is a member of this. Now it's over 100 nations all around the world. It's led by China, because China saw that its own economy was changing, and they needed to establish strong relationships, strong trade relationships, two-way trade relationships with more countries. They have it obviously with the United States, and they said we need to diversify, we need more, and we want to help these countries because that's going to help us in the long run.
Yeah.
So the idea of these massive projects being built was exciting, but it's also a little intimidating, because what if they don't build the necessary resilience and sustainability in these projects? So the Belt and Road Initiative, which is again directed by China, we're in discussions with them about how we can work with them to integrate sustainable resilience into those massive projects that could impact the lives of millions, hundreds of billions of people.
I have to ask you, because I know there's some people out there that have some pushback here. You said specifically that this would obviously help everyone. So can you address that, the whole concept of economic development globally going forward into the 21st century? It's not a zero-sum game.
It's not a zero-sum game, and the understanding of how something in one place affects something in another place is not always clear. And it's not always clear to me, and I've been in this business for many, many years. And this is where, again, sustainability and resilience come in. Because if you build resilience into your both your hard infrastructure, but also into the systems and processes that you utilize, you're going to be able to compete more economically, more effectively. So that interdependence, and there's nothing that's made anymore outside of the stuff that's made by the woodcrafters or the craftspeople, which I love, doesn't contain components from somewhere else. So that interdependency is real, and it has to be recognized. And that interdependency, again, leads to the need for more resilience and more sustainability in everything.
Well, I think we got to wrap this up, but I want to thank you for being on the show, and I hope you come back. And I do want to say for the audience that's watching, our show is called Growth Solutions, and if you're wondering why we're talking about sustainable resiliency, is because it's the foundation of the economy. It's all growth has to be based on a solid, stable foundation, and this is where it starts.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So thank you very much.
My pleasure, my friend.